Senator Bernie Sanders is with us. He is a member of the Budget Committee in the Senate. And what can you tell us about how the stimulus bill is shaping up in the Senate?
Well, as you know, it passed the House yesterday. I think we'll be voting on it next week. It got out of Appropriations Committee yesterday. Susan, I don't have to tell any of the listeners that our country today faces the most significant economic and financial crisis we have faced since the Great Depression. I know in my state, we're hemorrhaging jobs. You read in the papers the other day, 70,000 jobs lost in one day. People are losing their savings, their retirement accounts on Wall Street. People's homes are being foreclosed. Kids are not able to afford to continue to go to college. So we have some major problems that we face. And I think after 8 years of one of the most disastrous administrations in the history of this country, it is time to move us in a new direction. That is what the campaign was about. That's what Barack Obama ran on. And I think it is time, instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires and continuing the war in Iraq at $10 billion a month, I think we start investing in the middle class and working families. I think we start creating the millions of jobs that we desperately need, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. I know in my state, I suspect all over this country, our roads are in terrible shape, bridges, water systems. And also, and I think President Obama has been making this point, for decades we have been talking about energy independence, the need not to import $700 billion a year of foreign oil. Let's do it. Let's start creating the kind of sustainable energy and the energy efficiencies that we need in the United States. Start moving to wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and over a period of time we can create millions of jobs doing that. I think also what you're going to see in this economic recovery program is an understanding not only that we have to create millions of jobs, we have to take care of those people who have been hurt by this recession, people who have lost their jobs, lost their health care, lost their housing. You just can't leave them on the side of the street. So you're going to see an investment in health care and in a number of respects. We're also going to do our best to make sure that college becomes a little bit more affordable by expanding Pell Grants. So through a variety of ways, we're going to start paying attention to the needs of working families and the middle class rather than just the wealthy and corporate America, and start turning this country about.
A couple of questions, just listening to many of the comments made or questions asked during the past 2 hours. First of all, on the jobs creation side, you even use the phrase over the long term. If people need jobs now, what's in the package that creates jobs now?
No, we've all heard this new expression, shovel ready. And what that means is that we're going to be investing in those projects that are ready to start moving and putting people to work immediately within the next 6 months, within the next year. So with a crumbling infrastructure, and engineers tell us we have over $1 trillion of unmet infrastructure needs in this country. We all know our bridges are in terrible shape, roads are in terrible shape. My state water systems, both clean water and wastewater, need significant improvements. So you're going to see probably the largest investment in infrastructure, which puts people to work immediately. We talk about, in my state, we have done a pretty good job. We have a long way to go in terms of energy efficiency. We're a cold weather state. A lot of senior citizens don't have a lot of money, have homes that are poorly insulated. They need new storm windows. They need new roofs. You're going to see investments in millions of homes all over this country, buildings, schools. So these are jobs. It's both short-term, immediately. I think President Obama is talking about the need to create millions of jobs within the next couple of years. But we're going to lay the basis, I think, for a healthier economy in the long run.
I promised a caller that missed you by a few minutes I would ask the question for him. He is the smallest of small business owners, 7 employees, coffee company in Texas, has an SBA, small business loan, and he's almost ready to declare bankruptcy. He says, is there anything in this package for me?
I think there is. I really do think there is. I think we're going to try through low interest loans to help the small business community. Clearly, we know, and I go on to this for about 5 hours here, the outrage of what has taken place on Wall Street, which to my mind, Susan, constitutes probably the most significant and largest criminal act in the history of our country. You have had a handful of people, few hundred people on Wall Street who, through their incredible greed, their recklessness, their illegal behavior, has brought our financial system to the verge of collapse and has created an economic climate by which we are going to lose millions of jobs. Small business, as this gentleman is involved in, has been the engine where we've created jobs. We got to stop protecting small business, provide them the kind of loans and help that they need. so that we can grow jobs at the grassroots level.
Do you expect a Justice Department led by Eric Holder will pursue prosecutions?
I think that's one of the avenues we've got to go. But let me be very clear about this. I think that the people on Wall Street who committed this crime, and I use the word crime advisedly, have got to be punished. I think that the greed that they have expressed, where making 20% rates of return was not enough, earning hundreds of millions of dollars was not enough, that they had to create these new financial instruments, these derivatives, these credit default swaps, which have led us to where they are. They have got to pay a price for that. And more importantly, not only do we have to hold them accountable through a very, very thorough investigation, but what we also have to do is make sure that we do not go back to where we were. And that means we have to deal with this phenomenon of too big to fail. Create these huge financial institutions, and when they get in trouble, we have to bail them out. If they're too big to fail, in my view, they are too big to exist. Let's start breaking them up right now. Furthermore, when we talk about the economy, we have got to pay attention to health care. We remain the only country in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child as a right of citizenship. We've got to deal with the growing disparity of income and wealth in this country, where the top 1/10% earn more income than the bottom 50%. So we have, I really don't envy President Obama. The list of problems that are on his desk with a $10.6 trillion national debt, 2 wars, foreign wars, we've got some problems, but I do believe with new leadership, as a nation, we can come together and start turning this country around in a way, very different way than what we went under Bush for 8 years.
Not surprisingly, our lines are all lighted up for people to talk to you, beginning with Omaha. You're on the air for Senator Sanders.
Good morning, Senator. It's an honor to be able to speak to you. The question I have is, I'm hearing all the things that we should be doing. What I want to ask the Republicans is, if we took off all the things that the Democrats are proposing, and we have the power to manage it, just tell us, what would you do? What do you ask? What are you asking us to? What would you do to solve the problem? We hear the claims that you're saying that you don't want us to do. So just tell us, what would you do, and we'll look at it and let's see what you would do to solve the problems that's at hand for us. Because again, when Bush came out and said we need $750 billion, they went for that, and they were all in voted for that. So please, just tell us, what would you do?
Okay, many people did vote for that. This senator did not vote for that. I voted against the first bailout. I voted against the second bailout. These are very difficult issues, but I could not vote in good conscience to allow the middle class of this country, people whose standard of living has been in decline, to bail out corporate crooks who have made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So I voted against that. But I believe, in terms of the economic recovery program, the time is long overdue for us to start investing in our people. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. This economic recovery package will put billions of dollars into Head Start, into child care, so our kids can get a fast start in life and working families can know that their kids are taken care of in a decent way. In my state and all over this country, people are paying outrageously high property taxes. This legislation will put a lot of money into special education so that communities and school districts around the country can perhaps see a lowering of their property taxes, and school districts will not have to be laying off of teachers. Again, in terms of energy, I believe that it is imperative from a national security perspective and from a global warming perspective that we move away from fossil fuels and foreign oil. This legislation starts ending all the talk that we've been hearing for years, for decades. It starts investing in wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, energy efficiency. So I think all of those things are very positive. Now, I'm not going to tell you that in a $900 billion piece of legislation, there are not things that I would disagree with. I do. For example, among other things, I think the tax breaks in there are too high. But there is a lot of very good investment in this for the American people, and I believe very strongly that after 8 years of giving tax breaks to billionaires, after a war in Iraq, which cost us $10 billion a month, the time is now to start investing in the American people, creating good-paying jobs, rebuilding our country.
Pensacola, good morning. Republican line.
Good morning. I think your guest best illustrates what's wrong with our economy. You have a Congress that is 90% attorneys. I'm not sure Senator Sanders is or not. It doesn't really matter. But the problem is this. I know high school kids that could write a better loan application than what Congress gave to these banks. Let me give you a specific example. When the insurance company, AIG, got their money, they paid out bonuses, some multi-million, to mid-level managers. The CEO said, well, we have to keep our good people. They experienced 4 consecutive quarters a loss of $4.3 billion. Now, any company I've ever worked for would throw you on the street if your division was remarkably as inept as AIG was. This is what we need. Instead of having lawyers elected to Congress, what we need are businessmen, scientists, people who know what they're talking about. Senator Sanders doesn't know the first thing about energy. There is no electric battery manufactured anywhere on this planet that can drive an 18-wheel truck. You could take all the alternative energy that can be produced in this country, and it will not amount to more than 5% of what we need. We are going to need fossil fuels for at least the next 20 years. So instead of the Democrats talking about alternative and green energy and all the stuff that won't work, they need to start developing our resources we have now as technology comes online.
All right, let me jump in, sir. Thanks.
Well, let me mention to the gentleman, again, I'm not a lawyer as it happens. The problem, I don't know how many lawyers there are in Congress. There are many. But you really want to know what the problem is? It's not lawyers in Congress. It is the impact of large corporations and their lobbyists on what goes on in Washington. There is a reason why over the last 8 years we have given tax breaks to people who don't need it, why we have given tax breaks to oil companies who have seen record-breaking profits while the middle class and working families have gotten relatively little. So what we have is a culture here in Washington is where big money interests have enormous power and working people have far too little influence. In terms of the bailout, I happen to agree with the gentleman. I voted against it, but I want him to know, if he's on the Republican line, that President Bush came to Congress after telling us for 7 years how strong, and I hope everybody remembers this. Remember the expression, the fundamentals of the economy are strong, the economy is robust. That's what Bush said over and over again. And then finally, one day, half a year ago, Hank Paulson walks into Congress and said, oh, we made a little bit of a mistake. It turns out if you don't give me $700 billion to do as I want to do, no strings attached, the world financial system is going to collapse. That was George Bush, Hank Paulson. Congress ended up saying, no, that's not acceptable. You got to do A, B, and C. I didn't accept what Congress said. I voted against it. So clearly, the first $350 billion, to my mind, has not been successful. We asked the banks today, what did you do with the money? They are not even telling us what they're doing, which is outrageous. So, but in terms of sustainable energy, I strongly disagree with the caller. I think there's huge potential. It's sitting out there waiting to happen. To move us away from fossil fuels, and it's imperative that we do that both from an energy independence perspective as well as dealing with greenhouse gas emissions.
While we're talking about the TARP program, front page Business Day New York Times, Geithner says financial plan is in the works, a comprehensive plan to repair the financial system to be announced soon.
Well, clearly it is needed. The idea that you had people on Wall Street operating without transparency. We had Alan Greenspan, Phil Gramm, and Democrats as well, making the incredible argument that let's deregulate these guys. Let's break down the walls so that we can have these large, incredibly large financial institutions, and then let them invest in any way they want without any transparency, without any government regulations, without any accountability. This is somehow, according to Alan Greenspan, going to be really, really great for the economy and create prosperity. I was on the House Financial Institutions Committee for 16 years. I voted against the repeal of the Glass-Steagall legislation. It did not make a lot of sense to me then. But this whole philosophy of deregulation, let Wall Street do what they want to do, tax breaks for billionaires, unfettered international free trade, that is a philosophy that may have worked for the rich and the powerful, but not for the middle class. It's time to rethink it. Of course, we need to re-regulate. Specifically,
yesterday, the stock surged on Wall Street, as this notes, on the hopes that the government was moving toward creating a bad bank to purge toxic assets from balance sheets. Do you support that?
Well, this is a complicated issue that we're going to have to look at. The concern here is I simply do not want to bail out Wall Street with taxpayers paying the bill. I want to create a situation where if we're going to invest in financial institutions, in the long run, the American people who have invested in it gain from that investment.
Osceola, Iowa, independent line. Good morning, caller. Are you there?
Hello.
Yes, sir, you're on.
Oh, I just came right on through. Bernie,
How are you?
you surely have constituents in your area who are on your side and a number who are not. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
I can hear
sir.
you fine.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I got to ask you a question. It's been bothering me for a long time. You're my hero in a lot of ways. I got to ask you, do you believe that this country owes reparations for the slaves? Bottom line, money payments.
No, I think, no, that would not be, no, that's not one of the issues very high on my priority list.
Bath, Maine. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Senator, my problem, my biggest problem, you folks, in your committees sat around for the last month or so arguing about what the auto dealers should be getting and what the CEO should be paid and how they had failed their companies in the way that they ran their companies. The way I look at it, the last 8 years, the Senate, or the entire United States Congress has failed this country. Have you folks thought about taking a $1 a year pay cut or $1 a year pay for the entire year and let your funds, your money, that's $175,000+ till the day you die, go into the coffers to help us out?
First of all, it's not it is not $175,000 a year to the day you die. It is true that there is a pension. There was an older pension for people who were elected earlier. The pension that I receive is a good pension. It is comparable to the private sector. I think if you ended up having members of Congress work for $1 a year, you would end up having millionaires and billionaires being the only people in Congress who could afford to take that job, and I don't think that that is acceptable. But I think in terms of what we see nationally, $175,000 a year is a very good salary, no question about it. But I think it might be more appropriate to take a look at these folks on Wall Street and corporate America who in many cases are making 400 or 500 times what their workers are making, and take a very hard look at the growing inequality in this country.
We have 10 more minutes for your calls for Senator Bernie Sanders. Next is from Greensboro, North Carolina. You're on, caller.
Good morning, Senator Sanders. I had a statement to make, and I'd also like to ask a question. Historically, there are times for partisanship. During, for instance, the 1980 election, which is when I first registered to vote, I registered as a Republican because I thought that the country was in such a situation that we really needed a major change. And I think that in many ways, electing Reagan over re-electing Carter was a good thing. There are also times in history when I think that bipartisanship is not only necessary, but it's downright patriotic. Now, you, as an independent, obviously have to some extent rejected the two-party system. My question to you was, what do you think about the partisanship that's going on now during a national tragedy where we're at war in two different locations and we have this financial collapse? Don't you think that a lot of the partisan rhetoric on both sides is really kind of hair-splitting, and that it's really time now to put partisanship away? I mean, the hypocrisy of some of the partisanship now seems to just really not. Although I'm registered as a Republican, I don't really agree with their lack of support for our new president or their lack of acknowledgement of the situation. I wondered, as an independent senator, Mr. Sanders, I wonder what you have to say about that.
Well, I think you make a good point. There are obviously philosophical differences between people in both parties, and they're real, and people should treat each other with respect. I would say to the caller, President Obama, perhaps more than any president that I can remember, has really, it seems to me, and I think to the American people, really reached out in unprecedented ways. to try to bridge the gaps philosophically between the parties and on this or that issue. The fact that President Obama just the other day spent 2 hours, as I understand it, 2 hours speaking to the Republicans in the House. I don't recall, Susan, do you recall that ever?
I can't.
I can't recall it. It's really unprecedented. First week in office, he spends 2 hours. And then I have to say, I think it's really was not a good sign that after spending 2 hours asking for support of the stimulus package, he gets 0 Republican votes. So I agree with the caller that we need to work together as best as possible within these very, very difficult moments in American history. I was not impressed by the Republican rejection of Obama's efforts in the House.
Chicago, good morning to you. You're on for Senator Sanders.
Good morning. I support the stimulus package, at least the jobs part. I'm very concerned about the tax cuts because from what I've been able to tell, most people, when they get that extra $10 in their paycheck, immediately go off to that big box store that routinely forces its vendors to shut down operations here and take them over to China. And so we're doing, with these tax cuts, it seems that we're helping China and Korea with the electronics, and instead of Americans. We need to start thinking about every dollar being a vote.
Well, here's what you got. I mean, President Obama ran his campaign, and he said, I'm going to give a tax cut of up to $1,000 to the middle class. He ran on that. He's going to keep that promise. And a lot of folks who are hurting right now can use that $1,000. No question about it. The issue that you are raising, though, about the fact that when we go to stores, more often than not, the products that we're buying are not made in the United States, that our manufacturing capability has collapsed in recent years. We've lost millions of good-paying jobs. And when you go shopping, it's China and China or China, maybe occasionally it's Mexico. But this issue speaks, in my view, to the disastrous trade policies that we have. That's permanent normal trade relations with China, NAFTA, the fact that American corporations have shut down plants all over this country, thrown millions of workers out on the street, moved to China, and then they're bringing their products back into this country. And that's not blue-collar jobs, that is increasingly white-collar jobs as well. So I am not a great fan of unfettered free trade. I think you need a good trade policy which reflects the interest of American workers. And I think if these large corporations want us to purchase their products, it's high time that they started manufacturing their products in this country and create decent-paying jobs here.
I hope this isn't too much of a diversion, but while we're talking about trade policy, there's a front-page story in the Washington Post this morning about the waning days of the Bush administration. The U.S., as they say, declared war on Roquefort cheese, imposing a 300% duty on Roquefort, in effect closing off the U.S. market. Americans, it declared, will no longer get to enjoy because of the tariffs. Concerns that this might incite a trade war as a result. Now, Vermont being a cheese state, I thought you might have some opinions about this.
It's not Roquefort cheese.
That's right.
We're more into cheddar cheese.
Yes.
Good cheddar cheese, I might add. Again, the issue here is everybody knows we live in a global economy and trade is a good thing. I think our current trade policies have been shaped by large multinationals whose desire is cheap labor abroad and being able to sell those products back in this country. I think, by and large, that has been a disaster for American workers. We need to rethink those policies very seriously.
Our next telephone call is from Waupun, Wisconsin. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Thank you for the good work that you do and what you do. This is my actual first time hearing you. Anyway, I do agree with some of what you are saying. I never agreed with NAFTA in the first place because I thought this is going to turn us into a third world country, and I'm pretty much thinking I'm right about this. I also want to make a comment about what we're in, the financial mess we're in. I really think we're more in a depression, and I don't hear anybody saying that. I have been saying it. I live it. I am a 45-year-old white woman. I am self-employed. I am a massage therapist. The first thing people do in a financial crisis is put their health on hold. They don't go to the dentist. They don't go to the doctor because they don't have the money for it. You brought up my point. You brought up about the deregulations and putting back the regulations. I think that is where we really first need to start. because you took the protections away. And also, too, getting a control on the credit card companies and upping our interest rates on our cards. It's like they're sharks. And, I mean, I had a card for 9.99%, and it jumped to 29%.
Let me jump in there, Carl.
Well, let me, again, I was on the Financial Institutions Committee, so we worked on this issue. Here you have the insanity of the federal government, the American taxpayers, bailing out these large financial institutions, and then these large financial institutions are charging people 25 or 30% on their credit cards. That is basically absurd. So that is an issue that has got to be addressed. In terms of whether we're in a deep recession or a depression, I think what most economists will tell you is that real unemployment is substantially higher than official statistics, because the official statistics do not include people, what we call discouraged workers, people who have given up looking for work. They do not include people who are working part-time who want to work full-time. So the unemployment situation is, in my view, a lot worse than the official statistics indicate.
Fort Lauderdale, good morning. Caller, are you there? I know what's happening is watching the TV and not there for a question. Fort Lauderdale, last try.
I'm down here in South Florida, and the small businesses are extremely stressed. You're seeing doors closed across the board. I believe the stimulus package would work if, there was some conversation about putting a freeze on income tax withholding from employees. If you want to stimulate the broad, population of the country, if you put that tax back in each person's pocket, it helps with stopping foreclosure. It helps them go into these small stores and start spending again. I wanted to ask the senator and thank the senator for his candor. I think you're a breath of fresh air. I'd also like to ask you a second question. Do your colleagues feel the same way you do? What percentage of senators have a patriotic spirit as yourself, and are going to speak up about these injustices? And we shouldn't be helping the banks who are, really not loaning the money right now. It's just, thank you, C-SPAN, first-time caller. Appreciate it. This is true democracy, and this is transparency. Thank you for listening on the air.
I would concur with his applauding C-SPAN. I think C-SPAN is a breath of fresh air in terms of television. In terms of tax policy, I think the caller makes the point that President Obama has made, and that is if we give tax breaks to the middle class, I don't think it's going to solve all of the problems, but if they're targeted to people who really need the money, the hope is that they're going to take that money, go out and spend it, and create other jobs in the process. In terms of the feelings of other members of the Senate, well, I guess watch C-SPAN, right? And you could see the debates that take place. There is a broad range of feelings about all of the issues that we have discussed.
Well, to that end, here's what the Christian Science Monitor says about next week. With the biggest spending bill in American history on the line, the U.S. Senate is gearing up for a debate for the ages. With the Senate Republicans at 41 and the 100-member body, precisely the number they need to block legislation with a filibuster, Democrats could muscle the bill over the line by breaking off just one or two Republican votes. How do you see this playing out, and what's the time frame?
Well, it's going to be on the floor next week. I think it'll make very good TV viewing. I think the American people want us to move this country in a new direction. They want us to invest in creating millions of good-paying jobs and dealing with our infrastructure and dealing with our kids and dealing with energy, making more credit available to small businesses. And this is what this stimulus package does. In the House, President Obama got 0 votes, 0 votes. I hope very much that some of our colleagues in the Senate will work with the President, work with those of us who see this country facing an unprecedented crisis, and we just can't sit back and do nothing. We've got to start investing in our working families and create the jobs that we desperately need. So to answer your question, I hope very much we're going to get the 1 or 2 votes that we need.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, member of the Budget Committee, also of the Energy Committee and Environment and Public Works and Veterans Affairs. We thank him for being here and taking your calls. We're going to take a quick break. Final guest of the morning, Congressman Ron Paul of Texas.